Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with bandleader Kent Miller on the 2020 CD Plays the Music of Sam Jones with the Tnek Jazz Quintet. We caught up with him on May 12, 2020 to talk about the new COVID-19 world of no live jazz, this new album, the band, and so much more. Enjoy.
Thanks for taking a minute out. I think talking about the music is going to be a good thing. And before we get into the latest album, I want to know from you, around probably March 12th to 13th was when everybody started realizing things were happening. When did you realize things were going to start getting into shutdown mode, and how did things kind of start happening for you?
So I did, obviously, you read on the news, and so in February's time frame, you knew things were going to happen. Didn't have any idea to the magnitude it was going to happen. But I would say mid-February, I kind of realized things may not, may have an impact. Let me just put it that way. And, but I was already out the gate, with my project. Turned the corner. Really wasn't time to pull back at that point, just hoping for the best.
I think it's probably bittersweet to release an album during this time. Your Plays Sam Jones is a great album. People have the chance to listen to this, but you can't back it up with live performance. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and that's a problem. I mean, you want to put something out, have people listen to it, and then obviously, you get bookings because that actually helps as an independent, artist. That's how it pays for itself. So you're right. In one sense, it's good because people are locked down, so to speak, and they get a chance to listen to it. But from a financial standpoint, you can't really, it doesn't work because there's no, and right now there's no end in sight per se that, for clubs and concerts and, that'll probably be last on the list to open up. So that's pretty tough.
I want to go back in your life. You have some very defined Kansas City roots. Talk to me a little bit about Rockhurst, UMKC, and your history with Kansas City.
Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, actually, I'm from St. Louis. Now, when I was raised, when I came up, I was actually, I got introduced to music early. However, that wasn't necessarily the selected path, as a youngster. I played a lot of sports. My dad was in sports, and he, did a lot of coaching. And I have an older brother, and we played just like a lot of young boys. We played a lot of sports, and I excelled in it. But I always had an interest in music. But when I came out of high school out of St. Louis, I was recruited, and I didn't know anything about Rockhurst. I never heard of it. And so I was being recruited, and I was playing basketball and football, but I was actually a better football player than basketball. But the funny thing is, when I went down to run around to the different colleges, I'd look at the campus and all that good stuff, and then I would ask them, one of the questions I was asked the coach or the athletic director, I said, so can you tell me about the music department? And they give me a look like, what is he talking about? So, at the end of the day, the Rockers came up, and I said, sure, I'll go up and take a look. They made an offer at the time that, my folks had there would be three kids in college at the same time, so they made an offer they couldn't refuse, and they said, yeah, by the way, there's a conservatory right across the street, UMKC, and we will enroll you in that as well. So that's how I actually ended up in Kansas City. And so part of the day was at Rockhurst. In the early afternoon, I'd run across and take classes over at UMKC, music classes. Now, this is back in the 70s, so it's totally different, than it is today. But that was my connection in Kansas City. And I finished up and then headed back to St. Louis. And I was there in St. Louis until about 84. Then I went to New York and stayed up there about 12 years studying, playing, And that was pretty much how that was done.
So what kind of memories with musicians in Kansas City do you have? What kind of like formative experience did you get here?
So I think, because I was in school and I was on a scholarship. And so like today's college athletes, it's like a job, year round. So other than at the school, now this is mid-'70s, other than at the school, studying in class and private lessons, I didn't get out to the city to do jam sessions and things that, it was not granted. You go back to the 70s, I'm assuming you're from Kansas City, so you know how it was during the 70s. And so wherever there was music in the city, I didn't really get out like I did, years later. So I wasn't ingrained that because the demand at Rocker's, whether it was the basketball or whether it was the academics, I mean it was, and then with the music practice, it was almost 24/7. And so that's one part that I did miss out on is that life of music, in Kansas City. Even though it was the 70s, it was still, a lot of history that had been there at Kansas City. And I really missed out on participating in that respect of getting that scene or knowing the musicians that were around at that time. I didn't get a chance to really engage with those folks.
Well, then, you move on to New York and you get to learn from Rufus Reid and Ron Carter. That had to be huge.
Yeah, it was. Before I left St. Louis, I started playing with this guy named George Hudson. George had been around, like most cities had territory bands back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And George had a big band back then. And if you, do some history on George Hudson, Clark Terry and Miles didn't play in that band, but Miles was part of that East St. Louis area, and that's where George was from. And that was a good footing for me to kind of just start out and playing with big bands, understanding all the music and things that they were playing. But I wanted to gravitate to New York. Obviously, that's where everybody then and now wants to go to because that's the Mecca. And I had other musicians who were from St. Louis, like Greg Osby and others that had already moved there. And so I went up and started doing like most of the musicians. Now, that's when I started going to the Blue Note, doing the late night, midnight jam sessions, going to all the clubs, meeting the musicians. That's where I met Rufus Reid, met Ron Carter at the Vanguard, and all the guys that were just starting out. Now, a lot of those guys had come from Berkeley and other schools that were, I always tease them today. I said, I was hanging on by my fingernails when I was playing with them, and a lot of them have gone on to do a lot of great things. But that's where I started really, I would say went to street university, cutting my teeth, and I played with a lot of guys, played with young musicians as well and old established musicians. I met pretty much every bass player, George Hudson. I'm sorry, slipping my memory right now, but Milt Hinton is what I'm trying to say, was one that I really had a lot of discussions with. If I can go back to St. Louis before I left, when I came from Kansas City, I started studying with Wendell Marshall. And Wendell and I became very close. In fact, today, when he passed in 2001, I went back to St. Louis to get his bass. He wanted me to, have his bass, but I thought because of who the bass belonged to, it should stay in his family. And his first cousin was Jimmy Blanton, and Jimmy had a couple different basses. So one of the basses Wendell played. If you look at all those recordings from 42 through 70, I think that's when Wendell stopped playing. He was using Blanton's bass, And that's one of the bases I have now. And I take care of it for his family, but it still belongs to them. I've had it almost 20 years now. And that bass is on some of those recordings. In fact, I think I played it on this latest CD with Sam Jones. But when I got to New York, though, and yeah, it was like trying to be a sponge, trying to pick up everything I could, with all the musicians that were still around. A lot of them have gone on. As Ron Carter said, they left the concert. But I got a chance to meet a lot of them, and play with some of them, and it's been a great experience. It got a little expensive at points and times, and I have family down here in Maryland. That's why I ended up moving down this way. But I still get back up frequently. This D.C., Philly, New York, Boston kind of area is a good area to be in. So, but that was kind of my experience. And one other guy that I want to mention, when I first got to New York, the gentleman I used to play with was named Dave Burns. And Dave pulled me to the side, and he was very influential, introducing me to a lot of folks. He was, if you go back to Dizzy's big band in '48, he was one of the trumpet players. And another gentleman in that band named Ray Abrams. And Ray had a big band that played in Brooklyn, played all around the Manhattan places, and I got a chance to play with him. Now both of these were seasoned professionals. So while in part of the day I would play with the younger guys, my age, a little bit younger, and then I get a chance to play with the guys quite a bit older, but had all of that good experience. And they introduced me to a lot of other folks, and a lot of small gigs, big gigs, So it was a good experience. That's met a lot of folks in that era.
What was the first live jazz show you ever saw that made you think, man, this is something I'd like to do?
Well, I tell you what, it wasn't really a live show. I can tell you, I can go back to the one, but I was in, I'm going to say I was in the 5th grade, maybe, whatever grade you're, 8, I was like 9, 10, 11, whatever that grade is. And I was home from school that particular day. I think I might have been ill or something. And in those days, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I believe it was 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, they would have Merv Griffin's show would come on. And back then, there were always big bands, a lot of big bands playing. And that particular afternoon, Ray Brown, they put him out front. And I had never seen this before. And now this is in the 60s. So this is mid-60s. And he just wiped me out. And he was, the band was playing, and he did his thing that Ray does. And from that point, I wanted to do what he did and know how to do it. Now, here again, take mid-60s, popular music at that point was really the R&B. It really had taken roots, Motown and all of that. And I was into that kind of music listening, and eventually, a few years later, I got in electric bass and, local bands, little R&B bands playing in those things in high school. And but by the time I was a junior in high school, that summer, I got a job blacktopping schoolyards. It was a rough job, but it paid a lot of money. And by the end of that summer, I went to the music store and I bought me my first upright bass. Didn't know how to play it, and it wasn't the best bass, but the strings were about a mile off the fingerboard. But I had one, and that was a junior that year. So I could go all the way back to that when I was in 5th grade, wanting to have an upright bass, and I finally had gotten one. And that really kind of started. So it didn't answer your question. I mean, from a live performance, it probably was. Let's see, who did I see? I can't really remember. I saw a few people early on. It might have been Betty Carter. I don't know who. No, I tell you it was. It was Mingus. he was at Washington University, and that's where that was really my first performance. And he was the obviously, kind of it was his group, and but that was after I saw Ray. But that was the first live performance. Yeah.
Wow, that's a great way to start. A great story.
Yeah.
You've been down a lot of roads in jazz, been around a lot of cats, played a lot of performances. What do you like the best about being a musician?
Well, there is all genres of music. Okay, so one thing you learn, popular music in the 30s was a certain style versus popular music that you go in the 50s and the 60s and 70s. So you get influenced. Some guys talk about younger musicians who were born in the 80s and 90s, and they were influenced by the popular music of that day, which was rap music. But everybody's influenced by something. I just, the ability, and you take it for granted, if you're blessed with a talent and you just enjoy it, those who don't have that ability, they marvel at how easy, and it's not easy, but they marvel at how you approach it and how you're able to produce the music of whatever genre you're looking for. For me, it's being able to produce it, and people really enjoy it. You lift spirits. I always say that with the cast. I said, man, we're going to lift spirits tonight. We're going to lift some spirits. And being a musician, and you can do this probably in other venues too, but as a musician, it regardless of music, you're always lifting people's spirits. Now, I would say behind that, with this genre of music, it's something about it that is just it's the ability to have a conversation, the spontaneity of it, the improvisation of it it's something that you just can't explain. If you study classical music and you play it, you have to play it exactly how the composer wrote it, and you have to study the composer and the composer's music. You have to play it exactly that way. But in this genre, what makes it work is it's really the heart and the soul and the spontaneity of the moment. But you'll never play it again. The second course around, I talk to Ryan Carter about this all the time. He said every night is a different night. Every set is a different set, and you try to find the right note as a basis. You try to find the right note at the right time to influence the musicians around you, and it's that conversation, just like we're having a conversation now. And sometimes the conversation goes up, sometimes it goes down, but it's that, for me, that's the enjoyment I get out of being a musician and being able to affect musicians and affect non-musicians, the listeners. So that's can't answer anything. You like to have some money to go with it, but every musician will tell you it's the love of the music. It's the love of the art comes first. You can't live on that, but that's what always comes first. So,
yeah, without a doubt. So, speaking of that love of music, we're going to get back to the live stage at some point when this all ends, and I want to know from you, what do you hope both the musician and the audience gets from this time away from live music? Any revelations or realizations when we return? So
the appreciation of art. I mean, right now everyone is trying to do the live stream, and I get it, but it's not the same as being there and just actually feeling it, because obviously, if you're at a Broadway show or you're versus sitting and watching something on TV, there's a difference. If you're, at the club hearing the same song that was on your LP or your disc versus sitting there in the club experiencing it live, I think people are going to really appreciate how they missed it. And I think there's going to be another, hopefully, revelation, resurgence for the arts. And that's what I'm hoping, because like myself, most cats are back, while they miss the stage, they're shedding and getting better to go to that next level, and the creativity never stops. But once it comes back out, it will come back out. We'll get through this. And I think there's going to be a much, much more appreciation for the one-on-one, relationship, live relationship with the artist.
I agree. Absolutely agree. So my final question to you is this. Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, that you're the one that's living your life. Who do you think you are?
Well, I'll put it this way. What I hope people perceive me as, I try to be well-rounded, and that means I have a love for music, but I have a wife of 31 years and two daughters that are grown now. That, close family was important to me, and you sacrifice, I can tell you. You read all the stories about musicians on the road, and they stay there and they make choices. But for me, having a stable family and being able to be with my family and being able to raise my kids, to the point where they are, great women now. They're grown now. Was important. But, at the same time, I had to balance that with playing my music. I've had different jobs. I went to Rutgers. I got a business degree. And, I use my business talents, my music, and from that perspective, I consider myself a well-rounded person. Now, I'll say that at this point in my life, and somebody asked me, well, you put out a lot of CDs. As a bassist, as a rhythm section player, you're always on everybody else's stuff. I'd gotten to a point where I said, I want to do what I want to do, what I like to do, and with the musicians that I like to play with, and put some things out, and hopefully people enjoy them. And what they hear is really from a long life of doing all those things I mentioned, raising families, being up and down. My wife and I, like I said, we've been married 31 years. We had good times, bad times, but we persevered, and all that comes out through the music. I mean, if you don't have life, then you can't really say anything in your music. I mean, you can't just have music. You got to have life with the music, and then it all comes out, and people feel that. They it hits them. One way, if you play a ballad and it hits somebody, like on this CD, I like the tune Lily. I just like that tune, but I can't play it like Sam Jones and Cannonball, how they played it, but the group did a great job with it. And they all are seasoned professionals bringing their experiences to it. And that's part of, who I am. And so I would say if people want to know who I am or what I am, I'm, trying to be the best person that I can be, that is a musician that helps articulate the highest level of execution in this genre of music. And it's always a learning process. Start off every morning. I start back at ground zero. Get in front of the mirror, sit down. I do long bows, I do my scales, I do my pitch every morning. That's how the day starts. Then you progress from that point forward, So hopefully that answers your question.
It sure does. It really does. Yeah, I think you nailed it. And, hey, man, I really appreciate you taking some time out during this very strange time on Earth to talk about the music and talk about getting back to what we were used to back in March and everything in between, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, hopefully if, things calm down, I can get the group. The plan was to get the group out that way, stop in St. Louis and get to Kansas City. And so hopefully that happens one day.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Detroit, New York City, LA, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Kent for his time, music, and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.